I'm here with one of my favorite people in the world. I think a lot of people's favorite people in the world. Joey Coleman. Joey, you are one of the most universally liked people in the business community. I don't know what you want to call it, like the business mastermind, the business thought leader type community. Wall Street Journal bestseller of Never Lose Customer Again, and most recently, Never Lose Employee Again. I want to know what the crossover is between those two books.
Well, first, let me say you are so kind, John. I am both humbled and flattered by your opening introductory remarks. Thank you. I take those in and receive them and so appreciate them. So thrilled to be connecting with you today. What folks that are watching or listening may not know is John is actually not only a featured case study in my first book, Never Lose a Customer Again, but he is a favorite case study from readers around the world because he is just such an amazing leader and human being and business owner and entrepreneur. And so it's a treat to be here with you.
This is going to be fun.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. The crossover is this. I mean, I've been in the customer experience space for about 20 years.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is I had been in that space for about 5 minutes when I realized that you can't have a great customer experience if you don't have great employees to deliver that customer experience. The challenge, I think, is in most organizations, customer experience and employee experience are siloed activities, right? Customer experience is usually being overseen by, if you're super progressive, marketing, sales, and account management. And then employee experience is being overseen by the HR department, and
by Cindy, grumpy Cindy in HR.
Yeah, exactly. Or, you know, and I love my HR folks out there in the world and my people and talent teams. But here's the crazy thing. It is pretty rare that we say, oh, we're going to invite HR to this meeting and everyone gets excited. So I think there's an opportunity to pay attention to both. They're two sides of the same coin. They feed on each other, but they historically have not had a ton of overlap in the typical business structure.
Well, I'm excited that you're giving them that overlap because you always hear this old adage, like your employees are your most important customers. And I feel like that's one of those things that a lot of people kind of say and then others repeat, but nobody quite understands. Maybe people understand kind of what it means, but nobody really understands what to do. Like once you throw them that ball, they're just like, I don't know what this thing is.
So true. So true. Yeah, I agree with you, John. You know, lots of times it's like, oh, isn't that a nice thing to say? But what do I do with that, right? What I think is fascinating is over the last, couple decades, many folks have gotten comfortable with the concept of the customer journey and the customer experience. And yet when I go into businesses around the world as a consultant or as speaker, and I say, thanks for showing me your customer journey map. Can you show me your employee journey map? It's like cue tumbleweed. They're like, oh, we never really thought of it that way. And what's fascinating is your employees interact more with you, both in terms of quantity of interactions, frequency of interaction, and depth of interaction than your best customer. Your part-time employee has more interactions with you than your most valued, most active customer. So we need to be paying attention to the employee experience as well.
And so what can we do? I mean, I'm not somebody who has like a lot of employees, and my employees wear a lot of hats. So this has always been a struggle for me running a small business, even when my business would have maybe been defined as like a medium business where we had like 30, 40 people. Like now it's less because I just don't want to manage 30, 40 people at this phase of my life. But we don't have a lot of people and we don't have defined roles. And it's always been a struggle for me to appropriately figure out salaries, incentive structures, because there's not really comparison.
Yes.
And then, and we had this scary incident a couple years back where we basically figured out that we weren't paying the women that worked for us as much as we should have compared to the men. And we figured it out and we fixed it. But the reason largely why it happened is because there weren't really like comparing roles that we could match them up against. And looking back at the hiring process, again, this is what happened to us. I'm not saying this is universal, but the women simply didn't ask for as much. and didn't ask for raises as often as the men did. And so they didn't get them. And that's my screw up. But this is a serious problem. But as a small business owner, bro, it's just another thing.
Trust me, I get it. I don't know about you, John. In my 20 plus years as an entrepreneur, I've never found myself going, gosh, I wish I had more things to deal with. Right? Like, and as many folks start to think about some of these things like gender pay gaps and diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and the various things that are increasingly becoming part of our business conversations, and frankly should and need to be a bigger part in my perspective, and need to also being addressed and resolved, or at least making incredible progress towards, I guess, since we got our Canadian listeners on. I think
just add a couple U's.
Exactly. Just fill it all in. Fill it all in. I empathize with the challenge of being a business owner. I will also say that when you think about employee experience, as a business owner, you might be saying, yeah, but Joey, I only have 2 or 3 employees. You know, there's 4 of us, me plus 3 others. Any one employee impacts then at that scale, 4 employees counting you, any one employee impacts a minimum of 25% of your operation. And to your point, if they're wearing multiple hats, even more. So I would posit, and it's why of the 50 plus case studies in the book, more than half of them are from companies with less than 100 employees. So this isn't, oh, well, how would Google do it? How would Amazon do it?
Right.
Yeah, those case studies are in the book. But more importantly, how would, Betty's Bakery down on the corner do it? How would Steve's Gym around the corner do it? What would we do if we were a smaller operation?
Right. You got half your staff full-time, half of them part-time, and then a bunch of contractors.
Exactly. Yeah. I think the first thing that any leader has to do is being willing to acknowledge reality and confront it head on. And so the reality is, when you're earlier in your business career or later and you don't have plans to grow to a 30, 40, 50, 100 person enterprise, you need to recognize that the aspect of your job description that is bulleted items of, and you will do this, and you will do this, and you will do this, is potentially a useful exercise to consider as it relates to pay structures and, reviews and how we're going to do it. But increasingly in this modern era and going forward, those are the ante up chips to sit down at the table. There's got to be a more nuanced conversation, and that more nuanced conversation needs to happen with employees during the interview and hiring process. And it also needs to extend to the ongoing conversations when we add new roles, new responsibilities, new requirements. I like to think of the 4 R's, John, that every employee needs to be clear on the 4 R's. They need to be clear on the requirements of their job. What do we need you to do? How are we going to do this, right? They need to be clear on the roles of their job, right? Okay, here is the role you play in the structure of our business, being able to deliver service, deliver value, and your roles may shift and at different times, but they need to see how they fit into the overall discussion.
Can you give me an example of that?
So for example, most employees, I'm based in the United States, and growing up, there was this cartoon on Saturday mornings. There was a little short from Schoolhouse Rock called How a Bill Becomes a Law. And it kind of explained how laws were made. And anybody who grew up watching cartoons in the United States in the 70s or 80s is familiar with this story. Catchy little jingle, I'm just a bill, I'm a lonely old bill. Yeah, exactly. So there was this whole thing. We need to approach explaining how our companies work to our employees in the same way. If we're hiring you to be a customer service rep, or we're hiring you to be the receptionist or run the cash register at the front desk, we need to explain how your role relates to the entire customer journey, relates to our profitability, relates to what we do. We need them to understand that, hey, you spending extra time making this when we've budgeted that it will only take you this amount of time reduces our profitability, which means I'm not as able to give you a pay raise in the future as I would like. So we need to understand our roles. So we need to understand the requirements. We need to understand the roles. We also need to understand our responsibilities. These are kind of more at a high level, like, what are we counting on you to do? That we want to be very explicit about what that is. I think often employers want their team members, especially entrepreneurs, to understand the business as well as they do and see everything they're doing and, give it that 110% effort all day, every day. That's not going to happen. I hate to break your hearts, folks listening and watching along and thinking about this, but it's not going to happen. And it's certainly not going to happen if we don't explain what the responsibilities are as we see them, and also share what we think our responsibilities are as the business owner, as the entrepreneur, to that employee. Last but not least, we need to, so the fourth R. So we've got, requirements, we've got roles, we've got responsibilities. The last one is relationships.
Yeah.
And I say this is the last one, but it may be the most important one, which is when we are working in this enterprise, this is how we interact with each other. This is how we support each other. This is how we have conversations with each other. These are the other people on the team you're going to interact with. You need to know them not only in a professional level, but on a personal level, because business is humans. And humans interacting with each other is going to have more of an impact on your success or failure as a business than any other factor. If your people are aligned, moving towards the same goal, working in harmony, most businesses are unstoppable.
Yeah. It's wild. It's wild what happens when things work really well with one another. I've been on both sides of the coin.
Yes.
And I can tell you how it feels when things don't work well, where you have a Zoom call and your staff are telling each other to shut up and saying, well, I may as well just not care anymore then. And it just makes you want to cry.
Yeah, it does. It does. And if I may, two thoughts on that, John. Number one, let's acknowledge and empathize with the fact that running a business is really hard.
Yeah.
Like, we see the glorification of entrepreneurs, right? In the press and on social media. And a lot of that's fair. I've experienced some amazing things in my life because I am an entrepreneur. But what we often don't see is the shadow side of being an entrepreneur. The challenge, the struggle, the loneliness, the angst, the nights wondering how you're going to make payroll, the nights wondering, looking at your bank account going, okay, we can operate for 12 more days and then we can't. All the negotiations, all the headache, and most entrepreneurs, sweeping stereotype approaching, look out folks, are pretty horrible at celebrating their victories. They're happy to lament their failures and showcase the things that went wrong, but they don't even celebrate their victories or take the vacations or enjoy the freedom that they're hopefully building for themselves. So it's incredibly challenging. So I want to first and foremost empathize with that. Number two, we need to think strategically about the words we use and the environments we create. Now, I know this is not me being critical of you, John, but I talk to so many leaders who say, well, my staff, blah, blah, blah. Friends, a staff is a stick that you use to walk. Okay. It's something you use to hold your balance while you're hiking or walking. A staff is not a person. The humans that work for you are literally the lifeblood of your enterprise. So when we start to think differently about the words we use to talk about the people who are part of our organization, it begins to send a very clear message to my favorite word to use is our team, that we are in this together. We are working together. It is a coordinated, choreographed effort designed to win the game we're playing. And it is a game, and we are keeping score, and we're trying to win, but we're doing it together.
There was something, this is going back to Never Lose a Customer Again. So your previous book, which was wonderful. I don't know where we spoke about this together, but this might have been, you and I did a presentation together on publishing.
Yes.
On book writing.
Yes.
At a business event at one point. And we presented from both sides of the coin. You presented on traditional publishing and I presented on self-publishing, which is funny because I actually just signed my first traditional publishing deal Like I'm going to sign it today.
Which,
Literally.
number one, congratulations for
funny.
you. And it is ironic because you don't know, I am just making a shift to do a non-traditionally published book as my next. So this is the dance. This is life, right?
We gotta present again then.
I love it. I love it. We can take the opposite position that we took previously.
That's so funny. But maybe it might have been in that. You talked about, you tell me whether I'm making any of this up or not. Hindsight, memory is, certainly not perfect, but you spoke about how you got your book deal and you basically handed a proposal and then you handed like 200 names on that proposal. And you said, call up any of these people and they will leave whatever meeting they're in and take my call. Is that true?
It is correct. So so when I was writing Never Lose a Customer Again, if you go the traditional publishing route, the way you normally do that is you put together a book proposal, and then it works even better if you have an agent because the agent has the relationship with the traditional publishing houses. And then if you're lucky and your agent can get you some meetings, you go in and you pitch. So we walked into a meeting and I had submitted, this is like a 50-page document, right?
Oh, yeah.
That is kind of led in, and that includes, it's a book in of itself when you write the proposal, but it's very different than the actual book. And so we had, and I was an unknown author. I had never done a book before, either self or traditional. I was a speaker. I had some reputation, but the best thing I had going for me.
But you didn't have a big social media.
No, oh my God, I still don't have.
Right?
I still don't have a big email list or social media following, John. I mean, people try. I'm on Instagram. I've never done a post. I was talking to some social media people yesterday. They're like, you've never done even a single post. You're right. So that was never something that I invested my effort in. But I had a page of my proposal that I think was the game changer, and you alluded to it. And on this page, it basically had a list of names of people that I knew would help promote and support the book launch. And I walked into a meeting with a publisher and they said, I'm looking at this list of people. Did you talk to these people? And I said, no, I haven't talked to these people about promoting this book launch at all. And he said, well, how am I to know that they'll actually support and promote your book launch?
Right.
And I said, 2 reasons. Number one, I would posit that anyone who's on this list, if they were in a meeting right now and somebody walked in and said, Joey is on the phone, they would know who Joey was you didn't need my last name. That's how good of friends we are. And they would stop the meeting and take the call in the same way that I would do it if anybody came into a meeting I was in and said, John's on the phone. I'd be like, oh my gosh, I got to take the call, right? Number 2, 3 of these people have called you in the last 24 hours to tell you to get excited about this meeting, right? And this publisher, major publishing house, top 5 publishing house, goes, how the heck do you know that? And I said, because they're on my list. And here's the thing. I didn't tell them to call you. They called you, and then they told me afterwards, I just got off the phone with so-and-so to tell them to get excited about the meeting. How
did they know that you were going in?
Because they're in my network. They're my friends. They were my closest folks in the circle. And they had an interest. They knew I was in New York. They knew I was meeting with people. And they also were published by this publisher and said, are you meeting with X? And I said, yeah, I am. When's the meeting? I didn't know. I thought they were just curious and being good friends. I didn't know they were going to make calls on my behalf. But that's what friends do. Right. And that's why I come back to that R, relationships. The best thing I think you can do for your business is to, wherever possible, double down on your relationships with customers, with employees, with vendors, with fellow business owners. Where are you spending your time to mastermind with, to connect with, to have meaningful conversations with the other humans that touch and interact with your business?
There's a compounding effect that doesn't get spoken about enough. When you are in a world, I'll call it a world, you could call it an industry, but I think it goes, you're not in one industry really. Like you play in, I have gym owner buddies who, because we've shot videos with them, who like on stage teach what they do in their gym, which is world renowned. And they teach your framework to all of their staff. And so it's like, that's the fitness industry. So it's not one industry, which is why I describe it as a world. But when you exist within a world and you show up and you do work the right way for a long period of time, you start to get to know people and you start to build a reputation. And that shows up in ways that you can't measure, but you know it when it happens. And that's what you just described. I had the exact same experience.
I love it.
Where I had all of my publisher meetings like 2 weeks ago. Right. And we do them on Zoom now because so my agent normally she said, she's like, normally we'd fly out to New York and meet with people. She's like, nobody's in New York.
Right. The game has changed. Just how it's changed in every other industry on the planet. It's changed in publishing as well.
So she's like, they're in Connecticut or wherever their home is, right? So they're in Zoom. And so show up on Zoom. And it was the same type of thing. It was like, oh, so I got a message from one of my buddies who has a book that's just bonkers, like super successful. And he's like, yeah, he sent me a text message, right? He goes, so-and-so, I'll call him Dan. His name wasn't Dan. But Dan texted me yesterday, told me that you're meeting with him. Asked me about you because his name was on my list, right? And he's like, I told him to pay whatever he could and that he has to buy your book. And he'd be crazy not to, and that you could sell a romance novel if you had to. And so I go into the meeting with this guy who's Dan, not actually named Dan, but Dan. And he's like, and Dan had spoken to 2 folks, right? And one of the other editors was the same thing. He's like, yeah, I asked my personal trainer about you. And he's like, dude, I own all of his books. I love him.
I love it.
It's just,
I love it.
You can't manufacture this.
No. Right? And here is the, if I were to potentially bullet point this or sum this up, especially for anybody that's watching or listening that's newer in their career or younger in the world or the industry they're operating in, I know you want it now. I know you desperately want it to happen right now. What I can promise you is that the compounding effect is worth waiting for and is wild, and you can't even begin to fathom the scope of how making investments in relationships earlier in your career and maintaining those relationships over time and not burning bridges and not Xing people out of your life will lead to amazing things in the future.
And if somebody does one thing one time or says one thing on social media that your biases assume they mean something that disrespects or disagrees with something you believe in, give them the benefit of the doubt.
100%.
For 2 reasons. One is you don't know where they're coming from. You don't know what they actually mean. Number 2, they might have just been in a bad place that day. Number 3, I don't think there's a single human in the world that I agree with 100% of everything that they think and they say.
John, I don't agree with everything I think and say. I don't even agree with my own stuff. So of course I shouldn't expect to agree with everybody else's. I couldn't agree more. The place I've really tried to anchor into in recent years, because let's be candid, with the rise of social media and with the rise of polarization in society globally, there are a lot more friction points and a lot more opportunities to quote unquote speak fighting words or read fighting words on a comment on social media. I always try, and I'm not 100% successful at this by any means, but I try to have a running voice in my head that says, get curious before you get critical. Try to say, what is going on here? Is this person maybe having a bad day? Do we have something? I had a conversation not too long ago with someone who was talking to me about how shall I say? They didn't use these words, but they said, you see stuff on the news where we talk about the war on white men in the workplace. And I was like, wow, the war on white men in the workplace. I was like, wow, that's
as a white
powerful.
Man, as a white cisgendered man, I am offended.
Yeah, I mean, that's strong language. That is strong language. And the same as a white cisgendered male, I was looking at this going, wait a second, what is going on here?
Yeah.
But I tried to first get curious. And I said, help me to understand your experience with this.
Right.
And this person went on to share that at several times in their corporate career, they had been due for a promotion. And their manager said,
they worked in
let's say, because I don't have permission to fully share the story. Let's say generally in healthcare space.
Were they black,
industry.
White, male, female?
Oh, excuse me.
She, they?
White male who I think would identify as he, right? So
they were white male. Okay.
They were white. This is a white male who
okay.
said that many times in his professional career, he was up for a promotion and the direct manager said, we're not giving you the job, even though you deserve it, because we're going to give it to this either woman or non-white person or both.
They had some checklist that they had to whatever reason they did.
I don't know why, but this conversation had happened. And I said, interesting. And I said, this was a conversation. And he said, Joey, it was not only a conversation, but it was put in writing to me that this is why. Now, John, I'm a recovering attorney, as you know, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what? It was in writing? So, but I've known this guy. I've known this guy for decades. And I'm like, I have reason to believe that everything he's sharing is truth. At the very least, is true from his perspective.
Yeah.
But because I tried to get curious first before I got critical, I found myself having a very different reaction to his perspective, because I was like, wow, okay, you have data points and evidence in your life, not where you thought that someone else might have gotten it because of you, because of your gender and race, but where you actually had conversations where you believed this is what's said and had written communication where you read that this was what's said. I want to be very clear. These are complex, nuanced issues. But we do not, I think, get to any feeling of resolution or feeling good about our life or our workplace if we take the headline as being the whole story. Yeah. We've got to get curious instead of opening with critical.
You mentioned in there that you're a recovering attorney. Do you still get so many driving tickets? Have you overcome that habit?
I love it. I love it. John's referring to the fact that, let's just say I have a long history with driving faster than the speed limit that is posted. I've actually now been pulled over more than 100 times in my life. Now, in my defense, I've been legally driving since I was 14 years old. Okay. I grew up in Iowa, and in Iowa, you can get a full driver's license at 14. If you live more than 5 miles away from school, you can drive to and from school on the most direct route between 7 o'clock in the morning and 10 o'clock at night. So I've been driving since I was 14. I'm 50 now. So let's be clear. I got a lot of years behind the road. Okay. But I've been pulled over more than 100 times. I would like to share I've only received 6 tickets and only 3 of those have stuck. So I have a really good batting average. Part of that being based on privilege, let's acknowledge it. Part of it being on, when I get pulled over, I'm being subjected to a lot less profiling and judgment as the officer walks up to the car. Part of it because as a lawyer, I know how to navigate out of some of these conversations on the roadside. And if I can't navigate it out of the roadside, I know how to navigate it in the courtroom. So long story short, yes. But the good news, knock on wood, that has not been as frequent of an occurrence in the last decade as it was maybe in the first decade of my driving.
Okay. I want to...
Wasn't expecting that conversation, ladies and gentlemen, but this is the joy of talking with John. It's always going to be a great conversation. That's what I know to be true.
Talking to friends with these types of things and give them shit for stuff like that. I want to get back to this idea of all of the people that you featured in your book, because it's such an obvious way to rise up others while lifting yourself up in the process. but it requires somebody to put their ego aside and say, I might have had this idea. I am certainly not the only person who's had this idea. And I'm certainly not the only person who's executed on this idea. It behooves me to find somebody else who's also done this and actually give them the credit for it. I mean, I saw this with your most recent book, where I don't know how many people were featured in Never Lose an Employee Again, but I saw
over 50 companies from all 7 continents.
And every single one of them is shouting out the book when it comes out with graphics that it looks like you or your team prepared for them.
Correct.
Saying that I'm in this book. Brilliant. Brilliant. What's your mindset with how you approach that?
My primary mindset is celebrate them. My primary mindset is these are people who are doing remarkable things. And if I get to share the story of a remarkable human being with other remarkable human beings, I can sleep well at night. I can feel like on my tombstone, there are positive things that people have experienced from me. You are spot on, John. I feel like there's very little original thought in the world. I think every thought that is being had right now is a combination of thoughts from others before manifesting in new and unique ways. So I don't have any attachment to, oh, this is my way of doing it, as much as I do to, am I able to piece together a string of stories, elements of evidence, perspectives that will be of service to the person who hears my stitching together and piecing and help them experience better things in their life. So that's the way I approach speaking. It's the way I approach writing. And I will share that I went into both of my books with an idea on the framework, which was not only enhanced and nuanced and added to by the case study interviews I did, but there were things that I had completely missed that I got because of conversations I had with people. Now, the ancillary effect of being able to promote and share their stories, beautiful. And to your point, is there a self-serving marketing effect when 50 plus people from around the world are posting social media graphics the week my book comes out saying, hey, buy the book, I'm in the book, to their people? Yes, of course. And did I do all the things that we can do as business leaders to make it easy for them to sing my praises? Yes, I did, interviews with them. I try to refer business to them. I try to promote them. I figured out or maybe realized, or it was shared and I listened to it early on, that if you go through life keeping score, it is going to be a very challenging life from my perspective. And if anything, I like the idea of there always being more chips on the other person's side of things I've done for them and given for them than the other side. Now, interest of full disclosure, at the risk of laying down on the therapist couch, I continue to have work to do on my own receiving of those type of things, right? Because lots of times when you spend a lot of time giving, you're not the best at receiving. And I've received plenty, and I don't want to make it sound like I'm always all about the giving, but wherever possible, I try to open from, is there a way that I can make your life better, easier, smoother, more fulfilled, more successful, more happy? And if I can, of course, I'm going to do it, because why else am I here? If I'm not here to try to lead into my interactions with my fellow humans in that capacity, why am I wasting oxygen on the planet? What am I doing? So yeah, I feel very fortunate. I'll close by saying I feel very fortunate that I've been able to build remarkable relationships with people all over the world who were kind enough to open up and share really interesting aspects of their business operations for me to be able to share with an even broader audience. And any success that any of my books have had rests solely on the shoulders of those who are willing to let me tell their stories.
Yeah. It's such an obvious win-win to include other people in the work that you're doing, but it requires somebody to take the lead. I always wonder why we don't see it more often. It's this type of collaboration has been a massive part of my story. The first, it's really hard to kind of break past a certain point when you're trying to build up, call it a name, a brand. It's like you get started, there's all this excitement, and then there's just this valley of despair, and it's really hard to kind of get it. It feels like there's almost a line that you keep pushing up against, doesn't it? Where it's like, how do I, if only I could get past this, and it's kind of true.
Yeah.
But it's really hard to get past that. The way that I did it was with one ebook called 101 Personal Trainer Mistakes, where I reached out to, I think it was 30, maybe 40 trainers, and I said, tell me the top 3 or 4 things that you've done where you've screwed up in your career. Mm-hmm. And I literally just copy and pasted their words with attribution to them into an ebook. I called it 101 Personal Trainer Mistakes. I put their name as the authors, so there was like 25 authors.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
And I gave it away in exchange for emails. And that in and of itself, I don't think I'd be talking to you today if I didn't do that. That's what helped break through. And I learned my lesson. My first book, Ignite the Fire, came out in a second version. I learned my lesson. The major revision in the second version, aside from minor things that people had a hard time understanding in the first, was I included 90 people in the second version of the book. Every single idea that I had about anything, I searched the internet for somebody who had said something similar. And I brought them in instead. And then I sent them all a copy of the book with a sticky note in the top of it, literally handwritten, that says, hey, it's you, down, underlined their thing, and like highlighted it for them in the book when I sent them a copy of it. It's pretty easy to do this type of thing, but it requires you to take the lead. And the reason that I brought it up, Joey, is you're just such a prime example of this type. You hear this word all the time, don't you? Of just being altruistic. You hear this. You hear the need for abundance or the benefits of abundance. Abundant mindset. And yet we find ourselves stressing over figuring out how to entertain the internet through some song and dance, pointing at words in space, all by ourselves, as opposed to what would be even more beneficial, which is actually just finding somebody else who's already said what you want to say, and then talking over it and saying why you loved it so much.
Yeah, I think you hit on a core challenge of the human condition, John, which
what is this?
Identity. Identity matters. The identity we see in ourselves, the identity we have in the marketplace, the identity we have in the relationships we have. And I think the fascinating thing about identity is identity shifts and changes over time. And I think we spend so much time, especially with young people, trying to figure out, well, who are you going to be? I hear parents, I'm guilty of this. I've got a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old. I see parents all the time who ask, well, what do you think you might want to be when you grow up?
Oh, I know.
Or better yet, what are you going to be when you grow up? And one of the things I try, and I have these conversations with my boys because I'm curious. I want to know what's exciting them right now. But they also know, based on daddy's career and mommy's career, that your identity will change and evolve and they'll do different things. So I encourage when they, one of my sons recently said, so I think I'm going to start out as a baker.
Okay.
And then I think it might, I maybe a Navy SEAL.
Okay.
And then I'd maybe like to be an astronaut. And I said,
Navy SEAL to astronaut is not actually.
That's what Baker to Navy SEAL. That was not the obvious choice, right? And it's just like, okay, awesome. And so then we talk about those things, and he's curious. What would I need to have done? What would I need to learn? What books would I read? Where would I go to school?
Yeah.
What friends do I have to have had? What experiences do I want to have? And I want to foster that. But I think when we think about our customers, or we think about our employees, or even we think about ourselves as leaders, it's instructive to get curious about where identity plays in that role. I absolutely have an identity as a speaker and an author, but I also try to stand strongly vigilant on that identity not overimposing on the message that I share and the
Yeah.
people that I promote. And it's a dance. It is a dance, because here's the thing. When I finish a speech and the audience stands up for a standing ovation, I get that. The case study of John Goodman in my book that I profiled, John doesn't know about that standing ovation.
Right.
I get the benefit of that. I may text you and say, dude, you got a standing ovation today. You didn't know it, but here's what happened. But it's a dance. And I think the more comfortable we get with our dance, and the more comfortable we get with not having a fixed identity, and instead maybe having an evolving identity, or if things are going to be fixed, fix on first principles for what you're known for, not what you do, how you show up, not what you say, how you give, not what you've acquired. You know, when we make some shifts like that, for me at least, life has opened up to unimaginable abundance.
You hit on something important here, and I'm glad you did, because we actually went deep into this with, do you know Jason Fifer?
I do know. I don't know Jason well, but I know of Jason and his work.
He's wonderful. He's amazing. So he's taking part in this summit as well.
I love it.
And his book, Build for Tomorrow, is fabulous. And one of the things that we spoke about, you really hit on there. And he has a really good framework around that of you're not the job you do, but you're what you do. And that the job might change. And so he asked me like what I do. And my answer to him was, I fill pages. I create things that weren't there before. Might be books. I also own a software company. Right? But I create things that weren't there before. My identity is not in a book that I've written, or a course that I've created, or a website that I've built, or a software platform. It's my identity is in building stuff. Now, I mean, I joke. I've got a 6-year-old and a 1.5-year-old, right? 2 boys as well. And I joke with Calvin, who's my 6-year-old. I was like, no, buddy, like, you have to follow mommy and daddy's lead. Like we chose jobs where you could wear sweatpants as personal trainers in the gym. And then daddy thought, I don't want to wear pants at all. And so he decided to write books.
Oh my gosh, I love it. I love it.
So you could follow that path, but
yeah, exactly. Well, and it's funny when we talk about kids and what we do. We were driving home. I picked up my boys at school a few months ago, and we were driving home. And one of my sons, and I'm gonna alter the name here just to protect the story. One of my sons said, "Daddy, do you know that neither Billy's mom or dad has written a book?" And in that moment, John, I did my best to stifle a laugh, because I wanted to start laughing. And I was like, sure. Oh, buddy, I said, you live in a really interesting house. Yeah. You live in a house where daddy's a writer and mommy's a writer, because my wife is a writer and editor, and she's just absolutely incredible. And I said, not every family writes books. Now, both of your parents write books, but you running into friends who both their parents are writers, that's going to be the exception to the rule, probably in your life. Not necessarily, but probably. But again, that is we are our relationships. We are the worlds we operate in. We have a tendency to think that is the end all be all. And I think the opportunity for us is to try to regularly expand past the world we're in to dabble in other worlds, dabble in other roles, see other experience or have other experiences, see other perspectives. To me, that's what makes this fun. And maybe I have a perverse sense of humor and attitude on this, but
I think you do. But I think it's
yeah,
probably
fair
shared
enough.
by
Fair
other
enough.
people that are here. I mean, I think the people that are here largely wonder why they feel so different from a lot of people they're surrounded by. A lot of the people that they perhaps grew up with followed much more conventional paths, and they thought that's what they wanted to do or should do, and perhaps they did it or didn't do it, but even if they did do it, it never felt quite right, and now they're trying to discover what does feel right, or they have discovered it and trying to figure out how to make it work, but still a lot of the people in their world aren't following this path, whatever this path is. And I mean, it's right for them. Like, my best friend in the world is super happy in a life that I would be miserable in. You know, like a regular job, like a regular 9 to 5, a wife who has a 9 to 5, a 30-year mortgage, a starter home, and then pay off the mortgage, and then a second home, and it's just they go on their 2-week vacation every year, and he's happier than a pig in shit.
Yeah.
And we love each other endlessly.
Yes,
but we just don't like I love hearing about what he does. He loves hearing about what I do, but we don't envy one another for what we have that way.
Yes, and what it also sounds like, John, and knowing you, this is not surprising. You don't judge his life choices. You celebrate his life choices for him.
Sure.
Even if those aren't life choices you want. And I think one of the I start off the new book, Never Lose an Employee Again, with this observation that many business owners that I have met from literally all 7 continents have this common lament. I wish my employees cared as much about the business as I do. And to be candid and honest, I've said that. I've thought that. I've felt that. But what I've come to realize is your employees wish you cared as much about them as you care about the business. Now, don't get me wrong, friends. I'm not saying you don't care about your employees. What I'm saying is they don't realize how much you care about them and how often you think about them, mainly because you at best are telling them and maybe not as much showing them.
Yeah.
And there's an opportunity, I think, for us to be more candid with our team and talk about how much we value them, talk about how important they are, talk about the role they play in the organization, the responsibility they have, the relationships they're managing, coming back to those 4 R's, right? Yeah. And what are the things that we're doing? I might offer a piece of advice that I wish someone had said to me when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, getting into business as an entrepreneur.
Okay.
As quickly as possible, try to find a small group of fellow entrepreneurs. They don't need to be in your same industry. In fact, in many times it's better if they're not in your same industry. Probably. There's a benefit to having industry collabs as well, but it's often better if they're not in your industry to meet with on a regular basis, to learn from and to share with. The ability to feel like I'm not in it alone because I know other business owners and I can speak honestly with them. The ability I have to not only lean on other business owners I know, but have them lean on me when they just need to vent to the only person in the world that they feel might be able to understand their perspective. Lots of times, even their spouse or significant other, their children or their parents can't even understand where they're coming from. That ability to have connection and understanding, I think, is crucial to our long-term mental and emotional health, not to mention our resiliency and our success.
I can't agree more. And I'm going to make that the final word. Joey, dude, I'm so grateful for you. I'm excited to see you in a few weeks. We'll catch up more then. Thank you.
Thanks, John. And thanks to everybody who was kind enough to listen in. So appreciate you joining us for this conversation. And I'll close by saying, I wish you the very best as you continue your entrepreneurial adventure, as you start your entrepreneurial adventure, as you navigate through this messy thing called life. Just do your best to have fun and enjoy as many experiences as you can.